So the Unbelievable podcast has been my favorite podcast for maybe 10 years, and they've got some new videos like you've just seen called, I think, The Big Conversation or The Big Questions. What did it just say? That's what I said, The Big Conversation. And it debates some of the most difficult questions of today, but Unbelievable is a question that they say it's a podcast to get you thinking, and they'll bring in two people of two different views and just let them hash it out and draw your own conclusions. And we at Daylight, one of our pillars is study. And as you see on the screen, we've decided that we want to seek truth and find knowledge, and that no question is off the table here. And so we want to be a church where you don't have to be afraid to ask your questions. A lot of churches, if you ask questions, you're kind of squelched, and we want to make sure we're never that church, that the conversations are important. And so we've established an email called questions@daylightchurch.com. And so when we established this, we were hoping you guys would send in some of the deep theological questions of life, and what about the dinosaurs and so forth. And so I got just this amazing question recently that shows a keen mind that says, why is grammar spelled grammar instead of grammar? These are the kind of things you guys send me. So I'm going to answer the question because I take this seriously, and the answer is morpheme. You may not be familiar with the word morpheme, but morpheme are the smallest parts of language. And so if you take the word pens and you tear it down, the two morphemes in the word pens are pen and s. S makes it plural, right? And so the morpheme are the smallest units. You can't make them any smaller. And so there are things like ing and s and ed and er. And so ing obviously makes work into working, and s makes work into works, and so forth. And what we find is that this word grammar is derived from grammaire in Old French, which is really not that interesting, actually. But grammar is already a morpheme. And so when you read the word grammar, you're not looking for, it's not gram plus because a gram would be one who grams, and that makes no sense. So grammar is actually the morpheme. It's the actual word. And so that's why, and so there's your answer. And so send me silly questions, you're going to get an answer. But the reason I went ahead and did that goofy little thing just then is to let you know that I take it seriously when you send in questions at daylightchurch.com. And this particular series that we're starting is going to develop a lot of questions in you. And I want to encourage you that during the sermon, get out your mobile device and write them down. Send them off now. And so when you have a question during the rest of this sermon or the rest of this series, during the service, hit questions@daylightchurch.com, and I think you can even text it if you want to, and it'll come to me. And then in the last week, we're doing a part of it called What, where we're going to talk about your questions. So during this series, I had a friend recently ask me, why do you believe this stuff? And he happens to be a believer, but he's trying to figure out why he's a believer, why he's a Christian. And he asked me, what's your reasoning? And there's no way to do justice to this question in an elevator pitch. You can't just 45 seconds explain why you believe in God. And so I'm actually going to take 3 weeks to talk about why God, why be a theist, why believe in God at all, and a supernatural creator that's intelligent and personal, why believe in that stuff. 2, why follow Jesus? And then 3, why be a part of Christianity? And Christianity means a lot of people to a lot of things to a lot of people. So we'll define it by the time we get there. But obviously 3 weeks will not do it justice. And so I want you to encourage you to start asking your questions. This is going to feel a lot like this. Imagine you're pretty hungry and you haven't eaten all day, and then somebody hands you like a ginger, kale, pineapple smoothie, right? Thanks, but, right? It doesn't quite do it for you. And so I'm going to say up front that this is going to be a completely inadequate series. It's not going to answer all the questions. It's not going to dive in as deep as we would like. It's not going to satisfy you, but hopefully it will make you a little bit hungrier for an education, for knowledge. It also may feel a little bit like this. You're going to see in just a moment that I'm going to fly through some reasons why I believe in God, and it's going to feel like a tsunami. It's going to feel like a lot of information actually coming lightning fast, and there's not going to be enough time to swallow it or develop the thoughts or really appropriate it and make it your own. And so hopefully it'll just smash you down and you'll think, man, I want to study this stuff. I want to learn. That's part of the goal of this. And it may feel like this to you. It may be don't actually say the word yawn during my sermon because that will hurt my feelings. But if you're the person that this stuff bores you, then I want to quote Obi-Wan, who said, go home and rethink your life. So I've just got a ton of thoughts. It's not a mathematical equation when you try to prove God. We throw around the word prove. Can you prove atheism, or can you prove God, or can you prove Buddhism? And the reality is, no, you can't. Not with what they call mathematical certainty. This isn't an equation that you plug in all the numbers and you arrive at an answer. It's something different than that. And when we talk about Christianity, I want to make it perfectly clear that I don't even think that's necessary. So there's a branch of Christianity that's like a certainty-seeking faith that says I have to know that I know that this is the truth, and I have to know in my knower and know that I know that it's the truth. And if I arrive at certainty, then that's faith. And if I have faith, then God will bless me. And that, in my opinion, is very far from the message of Christianity. I don't think you have to know that you know. I think you should be convinced. I think you should have enough confidence in it to follow Jesus. That's what it means to be a Christian, is to be a follower of Jesus. And if you arrive at enough knowledge to follow him, then we've done well. And so don't look at this thing like I'm gonna find all my answers and know everything. And the reality is, you can embrace atheism, you can embrace Hinduism, you can embrace any worldviews, Zoroastrianism, you can embrace anything, and you'll never know that you know that you know. And so we need to get past this idea that I have to know the stuff to follow the stuff. It's not the reality. You have to be at least somewhat convinced. And so I want to say yep to study. My hope is that as we go through some of this today, you may think, wow, that was just way too much information too quickly, and I couldn't even follow what in the world he was saying. But I hope it inspires something in you, because I want Christians to feel confident in their faith and to be able to speak reasonably about their faith. Christians get blamed all the time about having blind faith and kind of being idiots. And educated Christians are an uncommon thing. And so I want us to be a congregation of educated Christians. And so I encourage you to do your homework. I encourage the person on the left and not the person on the right. And these were the best pictures I could find. But this is not so that you can win an argument. This is not to elevate your butt-headedness. So sometimes Christians get educated and they all become uber intellectually snobbish at the same time. I was there. When I first started studying apologetics and started getting my feet wet and understanding these arguments, man, I would just do my best to crush people. Like you're stupid if you don't believe in God. I remember being on a mission trip in England, and I met a guy who said he had a friend who was on the debate team, and he said, I'm going to introduce you to him, and he'll tear down all your arguments. And I said, take me to him. I'll crush him. I said those words out loud. That's what an arrogant snob I was with the intellectual arguments for God. And I want to just make sure we never become that. I think information should never trump people. And so when you get to the point where you want to beat people up with your knowledge, you're pretty far from Christ at that point. And so it's about feeling confident about who you are and being able to adequately share the message of Jesus without fear, but not about who beat who. You know, you see all these things, all these memes online about the atheist who crushed the Christian who crushed the atheist, who put them in their place. And that's just not who we are or what we are about. But here it comes. Okay, here's the puddle of mud on my answer of why. And so when I say puddle of mud, what I mean is I just threw down some thoughts. I just threw them down rapid fire, boom, 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 and turned them into a presentation, and here we are. And it's going to go pretty quickly, and I apologize for that because I have 25 minutes to answer the hardest question on earth, and I'm going to do my best. So here we go. Why? I'm going to start with the positives of why embrace God, why embrace theism. And I want to say this. These may not be that compelling to you. I can't prove anything. I'm going to share what I find compelling on this question of, is there a personal God? And I've read and studied enough to know every point that I'm going to make today, there's a counterpoint to. And every counterpoint there is to my point, there's a counterpoint to that counterpoint that's a counterpoint to the point, right? So I'm going to lay out just kind of briefly the stuff that I cling to that makes sense in my head that allows me to follow Jesus with intellectual integrity. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to find it as compelling as I do, but here it is. Here we go. Number one, there was a beginning. Philosophers at all times, which is kind of ironic, would say that there was a beginning to time. And kind of the foundational thought behind that is that if there were an infinite amount of days prior to today, we never could have arrived at today. And so there's something you can wrap your head around, but it's the idea that there had to be a beginning of time. In the world of cause and effect, there had to be an initial start to the whole thing. And I have a degree in physics, and I got turned on to Big Bang cosmology a while back, and I think it says a whole lot about God. And don't freak out about that. People get freaked out about the first few chapters of Genesis and whether it was 6 literal days of creation or whether it was 6,000 days or whatever it was. And I just want to say that whenever God created Adam and Eve, he created them as adults. And so they had a history built in. Adam had an Adam's apple and a deep voice. So you would look at him and say he was 18 years old or 30 years old or whatever. And so he was actually 30 seconds old. And so I have no issues with people being young earth or old earth creationists in here. I really think we're going to ultimately find out that we all were kind of wrong about time in general. And so don't freak out about some of this stuff. But there's a law called the second law of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics says that the entire universe that we exist in is in entropy. And it's It's collapsing into chaos, and all the potential energy, the usable energy in the universe is slowly being destroyed and dispersed into the universe, and we're losing touch with the ability to harness it, or the universe can use it no more. It's scattered and gone. And what that means is the universe is growing colder. And so over time, the entire universe will collapse into frozen. And what that means, as far as this argument about that there was a beginning, is that if there was an infinite universe, unless some constants changed, and we call them constants for a reason, unless some constants changed, what that means is the universe would have frozen out long, long ago if the second law of thermodynamics is true. And many scientists will say that the second law of thermodynamics is the law that all the other laws hinge upon. It's the consummate physical law. And so what it means is there was a beginning. Philosophers say it, scientists say it, there was this beginning. And somehow after that beginning, there's what they call universal expansion. When the Hubble Space Telescope became active, they learned that everything is moving away from everything else. It's kind of like when an ambulance runs past you and you hear, it's called, who knows what the effect's called? Because it goes, when it goes past you. That was embarrassing. What's it called? So it was called the Doppler effect when it relates to sound, and the Doppler effect sort of works with light as well, and they call it redshift or blue shift. And what that means is you can view something and you can tell whether it's even something very, very far away. You can tell whether it's approaching you or moving away from you based on the shift in the color spectrum. And so they learned real quick that the universe is expanding. So let's back that up a day. That means it was smaller a day ago, and smaller a day before that, and smaller a year before that. And what that means is that at some point it was infinitesimally small, is what they've concluded. And they do this through mathematical formulas as well. And they have what they call a singularity, which we refer to as black holes now. But there was this singularity where everything was confined to just the tiniest little piece, and the universe exploded from there. And how the arguments go and how the equations turn out is that before that, there was no before that, because time didn't exist, because matter didn't exist, and matter and time are correlative. They exist. You can't have one without the other. See, you see what's happening here? Boom, boom, boom. It's coming at you. Guys, stay with me here. And so there was nothing, and then there was everything. And I think that can be scientifically shown, and that's what Big Bang cosmology talks about. And now they talk about a radiation afterglow that they can detect, and it basically means it's like if you walk in a room where there was a fireplace was on, a gas fireplace was on 20 minutes ago. That room is going to be warmer even though the fireplace has been turned off, right? The universe is like that. It shows a radiation afterglow everywhere from a massive explosion that they've discovered. And so there was this massive explosion where nothing became everything. And then you've got Einstein's equations of E equals mc squared, which, as I mentioned before, says that mass, space, time, energy are all correlated. You can't have one without the other. And so what you find out is if you back up in history long enough, there's a point of nothing. And Aristotle said nothing is what rocks dream about. There was nothing, and then nothing became everything. And so in a world of cause and effect, then we have to ask the question. It begs the question, why? What was the cause that caused nothing to become everything? And that nothing has to be immaterial, because there was no matter. I want to say in that moment before creation there was no matter, but I can't say in that moment because there was no moment, because there was no time. Whatever it was outside of all the laws. Whatever the cause and effect was. And there has to be an uncaused cause, because you can't have an infinite series of time. So that's another argument for another day. So the question is, what caused it? And it had to be immaterial. But then when you examine the creation, it tends to, in my opinion, it leans towards a pretty intelligent whatever that thing is. And that thing has to be immaterial, which we would call, or spiritual, right? So there's two things that can be immaterial and be nouns. They're abstract objects and spirits, right? Those are the two nouns that we use to describe something that is immaterial. But abstract objects are things like architecture or the number 7. And architecture and 7 never did anything. Their abstract objects do nothing. The only causal, immaterial possibility is a spirit. And so I find this stuff really compelling, is that everything became nothing in an instant. Something had to cause it. That something had to be spiritual in the way I interpret the data. And so what is the cause? I believe the cause is what we would call God. And then we end up in this universe that seems to be it seems to be designed so that Chinese kids can play hopscotch. It seems to be designed so that you could sit in these seats today and hear my voice. It seems to be designed for you and for me. And I put a picture up here of the moon because without the moon, we'd all die. Without the earth rotating a particular speed, we would all die. If the earth rotated a little slower, we'd all die. If the tides were bigger, if the tides were smaller, if the strong nucleic forces and the weak nucleic forces were weaker or stronger, we'd all be dead. If Jupiter and Saturn didn't exist, we'd all be dead. It's almost like the entire universe has been created for you. For carbon-based life to live on this little spinning rock that is nothing in the grand scheme of things. And yet the moon and the stars and the skies and the trees and the birds, they're all there for not only our enjoyment, but for our existence. So whatever that first cause was, that immaterial spirit that brought everything into being from nothing, whatever it was, seemed to have us in mind. Can't prove that, but it sure looks that way. And then I look at nature. Anybody ever heard of a megapode? And if you've watched some of our series before, I'm just touching on stuff that we've talked about in here before. But megapodes are also called mounding birds. And mounding birds are these little birds. They're about the size of a chicken. You can't tell from this picture. I mean, for all you know, that could be a massive log, and that's a huge chicken, but that's not the case. It's a megapode. And these megapodes are about this big, which means their brains are about this big. They're about the size of a pea or smaller. And yet these megapodes, mounding birds, create these mounds of dirt over their eggs. So they lay eggs and then they create mounds of dirt. And those mounds of dirt will be as big as those seats back there. I mean, they'll be 40 feet tall and 80 feet wide. And what's fascinating is these eggs have to be kept at an exactly, absolutely precise temperature and absolutely precise humidity within like 0.1% variance on either direction, or the egg dies. And somehow these birds, with their little pea brains, know exactly how much debris to put on these mounds. And they know when the weather shifts. Somehow they have an inner barometer that scientists can't place. They've got this they know when the barometer shifts, so they scrape away dirt from the mound. And then they know when it needs more temperature, so they put more dirt on the mound. And nobody can talk about why. Nobody has any clue how they know with their little bird brains. But here's my point, is there's no evolutionary precursor to these birds. There's nothing else like them anywhere. And so if you embrace a naturalist perspective, you have to say, how did this thing happen? And I think I can say how is because this incredibly benevolent, awesome spirit that cared about us said, be. I feel like it's the best explanation. It may not be the only explanation, but I feel like it's the best. You look at the bombardier beetle and the bombardier beetle, and the bombardier beetle has a butt turret that blows other animals away. So a scorpion comes up to the beetle, he turns his butt turret and basically blasts him with his butt and sprays acid all over him. And it's like this explosive machine gun. If you ever get a chance to watch him in slow motion, he has a machine gun turret in his butt. And it can face any direction. I'm not even going to try it. I'm not going to try it. But he can go up over his head and shoot. If you're coming at him head on, he can blow you away, right? There's no evolutionary precursor. There's no other animal in the animal kingdom like him. I see God in that. You may not. I do. I find it pretty compelling. Even the giraffe, we go to the zoo and we say, wow, giraffes are really tall. What happens to you when you stand on your head for a little while? I don't know. I've never done exercise in my life. If you're doing yoga and you're in downward dog for a while and you stand up real quick, what happens? Head rush. Why? Because the blood is rushed to your head. This is fascinating. There's no other evolutionary precursor to this one. The giraffes have these valves in their heads that perfectly regulate the rush of blood to their heads, so that when they're eating from a tree and then they eat from the grass and they eat from the tree, we're talking 30 feet difference. For us, it's a matter of 3 feet and we get blood rush. These guys can do it all day long and never get blood rush because they have this specific design that no other animal has. And it's fascinating. And there's all these examples in the animal kingdom that to me speak of an artist, speak of a creator that's fascinating. It may not compel you, but it seriously compels me. And then you look at human beings and things like skin and even your eyebrows. What teleologically, like what is their purpose? What do? They deflect sweat. And I just have to think, wow, that's pretty cool. If I think about survival of the fittest and Darwinism, I would think that would not be high on the mutation agenda to say, well, I'd prefer not to have sweat in my eyes. But there it is. When we have skin, our skin actually replaces itself periodically. So you can write in a permanent marker, and how long until it's gone? A week, 2 weeks, something like that? It's amazing stuff that lets all the right stuff into your body and keeps all the wrong stuff from coming out of your body. And we just take it for granted, but we're just masterful pieces of artwork. And I see God in all that. In Job it says, ask the animals and they'll teach you, the birds of the air and they'll tell you, speak to the earth and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. Which of these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is the life of every creature and the breath of all mankind. In the Psalms he says, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There's no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In Romans it says, ever since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, being God, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made, so that men are without excuse. I almost think it's as axiomatic as just opening your eyes. I don't know how to wish that on somebody. I don't know, how do you compel someone to see something new for the first time? But it feels like to me it's just something. It's something you can see. You just look around and you see a designer and you see a creator. And then I want to talk about some of the negatives. Why I'm not a naturalist. And so, kind of when you talk about atheism, you're talking about naturalism. Which one of these atheists in this program we talked about said, I'm not a naturalist, so I've got to look into him because that doesn't make any sense to me at all. But why I'm not a naturalist is, one, there's no time for biogenesis. Biogenesis is, of course, the first life. And in your biology classes, you heard the first single simple cells, and there's nothing simple about a cell. And so typical, and again, this gets into some theological debates that I'm happy to talk about, but typical science nowadays says the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. And that comes from various strands of science. And so, but they'll say the earth is about 4.3 billion years ago, or billion years old. And so, it took almost 10 billion years for everything to coalesce into a planet. And the problem with biogenesis is it took hundreds of millions of years at a minimum for the earth to cool down where even the most simple form of life could possibly exist on this planet. And so you've got this little window for life to emerge if it's going to happen unguided or unaided somehow. And in my opinion, that window is just like insanely too small. You've probably heard the analogy that if you put an infinite amount of monkeys with an infinite amount of typewriters and they type an infinite amount of letters, that eventually you'll have the works of Shakespeare. And you can go back and watch our series called "Can You Have a Brain and Be a Christian?" But I think we kind of debunk that. And it's if you take the word, lovely as a tree. What's the Shakespearean poem that starts off like that? Oh my gosh. I think we'll never see something as lovely as a tree. Anyway, it starts with the word that. It's not. That's what I said. It's not Shakespeare. So you take a poem that starts with thou that's kind of Shakespearean. Here we go. The word thou, Thou, is 4 letters, and then you have to have a space after them, right? So the odds of a monkey banging out on a typewriter the word thou are 1 in 26 to get the T right. Then it's 1 in 26 times 26 to put the second letter in to get both of those placed. So to write the word thou with the correct space at the end is 1 times 26 times 26 times 26 times 26 times 26 times 20. There. 5 26s. I don't know what that math turns out to be, but it's a bunch. Now you want to say the entire poem or the whole 13 stanzas or the whole epic saga or whatever, and the odds just become astronomical that it's absolutely impossible for this thing to occur. And now when you start talking about a single strand of DNA that's so far vastly above the information in the word thou, it's encyclopedias that the monkeys would have to bang out to get the simplest form of life on this earth. And there's this tiny, tiny window for that to have occurred. In my opinion, it's unfathomable. I don't think it's realistic to go there. So I don't think there was time for biogenesis. There's a thing called evolutionary divergence that speaks to me in an anti-naturalistic sort of way. And evolutionary divergence says that there's these evolutionary chains that supposedly happened, and they share a common ancestor, and then they arrive at particular traits, right? The problem is that you've got all these animals all over the animal kingdom that supposedly don't share the same common ancestor, and yet do share the same common traits. And so you'll find a lizard that has an eye that can look around like this, and you'll also find a bird that has an eye that looks around like this, and they don't share the same common ancestor. They branched out and then developed these traits much later, separately, not from one parent passing down to a child and passing down. It's that these unbelievable mechanisms occurred in separate branches. And one example, and this is just fascinating, you can check out the hummingbird or the hummingbird moth, and you'll see these things are not in the same, by anybody's record, they're not in the same evolutionary branch. They don't share common ancestry. And yet they're practically the same creature, removed by geography in stellar ways. It's almost like God just said, the hummingbird's pretty cool, I think I'll make a moth. I don't think naturalism accounts for evolutionary divergence. I don't think naturalism accounts for biological explosions like the Cambrian and Precambrian explosions where there was simplicity of life and then all of a sudden there was this magnitude of really sophisticated life. And it all happened seemingly at once because it all happens in the same rock fossil stratas in the fossil record. And so anyway, I'm moving on. And then evil Spock. And so the only way, in my opinion, a naturalist can deal with the concept that biogenesis didn't have time, of evolutionary divergence and so forth, is to say, yeah, but there are an infinite amount of universes. And this is pretty commonly thought about nowadays, and it just sounds like science fiction to me. In an episode of Star Trek, they encountered a parallel universe where they encountered evil Spock, and so Spock met his evil counterpart because they were in a parallel universe, and the only difference between Spock and evil Spock was that evil Spock had a goatee, right? And that's science fiction to me. Now, if they ever come up with a quantum theory of everything, I may shift my views on it, but they don't have it right now. And this seems like a fairy tale to me. And we get blamed for following myth and fairy tale, but to believe naturalism, you have to embrace multiverse theory, of the sort that is propagated. It doesn't compel me at all. It just sounds silly. I also find determinism deeply unsatisfying, and to be a naturalist, you have to be a determinist. And so what a determinist means is that everything is determined for you. You are a product of your DNA. You chose to sit in the chair that you sat in today because your DNA compelled you to, and there's nothing transcendent about that. There's no spirit. There's no being in you. There's no consciousness outside of your brain waves. Your brain waves told you where to sit. You were determined to sit there by cause and effect until this moment, and there is actually no volition. There's no will. I find it completely uncompelling. I find it as an axiomatic truth that I can choose whether to go right or to go left or to spin around in circle. And none of you know what I'm going to do before I do it. I think free will is obvious. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the philosophers who disagree with me are right, but I find it compelling. And I find determinism completely non-compelling. I think survival of the fittest ain't the way. I think if survival of the fittest was the moral law, our laws would look completely different. I don't think we would protect the weak. I don't think we would necessarily have such a problem with human trafficking because human trafficking propagates seed and seed propagates life, and that's survival of the fittest. I think the moral laws would look different if naturalism were the way of the world. And I do think we're more than meat sacks. I think there's something transcendent about humans, and I think you can just watch them and see. Now, I could be wrong about it. I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm not even saying it makes a compelling case against atheism. I'm just saying, for me, I see value in you that goes beyond your flesh. I think there's something important about us that goes beyond just our genetics. And then finally, here, we're done. This is it, guys. Boom, 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 boom. There it was. Finally, there's revelation in what they call a cumulative case. And so revelation means we're little specks, we're little ants on a hill, and there's something much, much bigger than us. And we can't know anything about that much bigger than us unless that much bigger than us comes down and reveals itself to us. And I believe God has done that. I believe God has made us, has allowed us to know him through the revelation of nature, but also through the revelation of his son, Jesus. I think Jesus was God. I think Jesus is what God looks like. Jesus is king of the world. Jesus is the revelation of God to man. And so next week we're going to talk about why Jesus, why embrace Jesus. And when I say cumulative case, now when I tie in the megapode, the mounding bird, with the revelation of Jesus, with the idea that determinism seems like nonsense to me, it all comes together into one little nice stew that's pretty good to eat. I'm a believer. I am. And I fight it all the time. I try to convince myself to be an atheist all the time, and I fail constantly. And a lot of it has to do with these facts that we've talked about today. In Colossians, it says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For by him were all things created that are in the earth, in the heaven, and that are on the earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. So when we look at the moon and we look at the stars and we look at the trees and the shoreline and we get lost in the vastness of nature, we can see a God who sees you. Paul sang a song today that says he never stops working. Even when I don't feel it, he's working. Even when I don't see it, he's working. And then it says that he's light in the darkness. And we live in a universe of darkness. And I think seeing the universe through the lens that God is there, that Jesus was real, illuminates everything and makes it clear that you are more than a meat sack, and there is a God who is involved in your life and cares about you.